Hey friends, I hope you are ready to read chapters 11 and 12 with me of White Fur Flying by Patricia MacLachlan. At the end of chapter 10, we learned that Jack, one of the new foster dogs with the Cassidy family, was missing. So Mama took Cody, their other Great Pyrenees dog, and went out looking for them. Daddy is a vet and he had an emergency at the vet office, so he's gone there. So the girls are at home, and let's start chapter 11 and see what is happening. I woke hearing rain and pounding at the kitchen door. I got up and saw Phyllis Croft at the door. She wore a raincoat, but her hair was wild and wet. She looked like a child. I opened the door and she rushed in. "Is Phillip here?" she demanded. "Where are your mother and father?" I took her coat and shook the rain off of it. I hung it on a hook by the door. "Jack got out last night. He ran off, and my mother went after him," I said. "Daddy had an emergency." "Where's Phillip?" she said. Alice came into the kitchen in her pajamas. "What's happening?" she asked. "I can't find Phillip," said Mrs. Croft. She sat in the kitchen chair and began to cry. "His bed hasn't been slept in," she said. Tears came down her face. "It's my fault," she said. "His parents called and he heard me talking to them. They've been having trouble. I screamed at Phillip to talk to me. I needed to know what he was thinking, and now he's gone." Alice looked quickly at me. "We were the only relatives able to take him," said Phyllis. "I don't know anything about children. I don't know anything about Phillip." "They've been having trouble," I repeated. It was half a question, half me talking to me, telling myself something. "Does Phillip know about their trouble?" I asked. "I think so," she said, "but he doesn't speak." "Did he see the lights on last night?" I asked. "The lights in the yard?" Mrs. Croft nodded. "We all saw them. But where would he go in the pouring rain? Maybe he wanted to get away from me. It's my fault. I shouldn't have screamed at him." Alice sat next to Mrs. Croft and took her hand. "It's not your fault," she said. "It's no one's fault." Suddenly, I knew why Phillip couldn't talk, and I knew where Phillip had gone. I ran to my bedroom and pulled on my jeans and sweater. Callie turned over and looked at me from the bed. I ran back into the kitchen and pulled on my boots. "Phillip went to save Jack," I said. "Out in this rain for a dog?" said Mrs. Croft. "For a dog who loves Phillip," I said. I put dog snacks into a plastic bag. I picked up a rolled-up dog blanket. "Alice, get me 2 bottles of water. Daddy will be home soon from the clinic. Mama will call on her cell phone." What are you doing?" asked Mrs. Croft. I put on my slicker. "Alice, take care of Callie. She doesn't like the rain. She might miss me. She might miss the dogs." I stopped then. "Are you all right alone?" I asked Alice. Alice nodded. "I'll stay with her," said Mrs. Croft. She started to cry again. "We'll stay with each other," said Alice. I put some breakfast biscuits in my pockets and some lumps of sugar. We could hear the sound of pellets hitting the windows. Hail. "I'm going to find Phillip," I said. I opened the door and went out of the warm kitchen into the cold. I put up my slicker hood and hurried down to the meadow. The rain and hail pellets sounded loud against my slicker. My pant legs were already wet. The rain came down harder and there was thunder. I passed the cows who stood under the big tree in the meadow. They stood in a comforting group, like a cow family. I thought of Jack, lost in a place he didn't know. I thought of Phillip, who couldn't call for help. Phillip, who wouldn't talk because he thought his mother and father's problems might be his fault. Something he'd said, perhaps. His silence might keep them all safer. And like Phyllis, I began to cry. Chapter 12. I hurried down to the meadow. My wet pant legs were cold. I ran to the nearest barn to get out of the rain. Mama had been out all night looking for Jack. She hadn't called because she knew Alice and I were sleeping. She had Cody. Jack had no one. Phillip had no one. Inside the barn, the horses in their stalls peered at me. "Phillip! Jack!" I called. "It's Zoe!" I knew Mama and Cody had been here. They would have come here first. There was silence except for the snorting of horses. I put my hood back up and ran outside again, across the dirt road to the next meadow. The sky grew even darker, and the rain came harder. I ducked between the rails of the gate and ran through the mud to a yellow barn. It was suddenly quiet in the barn and strangely peaceful. The horses rolled their eyes at me. Who are you? Do you have a carrot? A lump of sugar? I did have some lumps of sugar that I'd stashed in my pockets, along with some breakfast biscuits, dog treats, and 2 bottles of water. I couldn't remember why I had put the sugar in my pockets, but now I was glad. The horses were glad too. The 4 of them crowded around, and I fed them all sugar lumps. Philip? Philip, are you here? I called. Jack? Mama? No answer from Mama. Of course Philip wouldn't answer. I would have to search every stall. The horses had stepped back when I raised my voice. I went from stall to stall, looking in each one for a dog or 2 and a boy. In one stall was a pile of hay. There was a small, scooped-out place where someone or something had rested. I leaned down and saw it, a clump of dog hair. I picked it up. It wasn't Cody's pure white hair that I knew so well. It was molted, black and white. Mottled, black and white. Jack's hair. But where were they, and where was Mama? Suddenly I heard a new sound. It was bigger hail hitting the barn roof. It started light at first, then grew heavier. The horses were restless with new sound. I looked out the door and saw hail hitting the ground, collecting in places like little bits of glass. The sky was even darker now. I had to go now before the hail got larger and the wind grew stronger. I put my hood up and ran across the paddock and across the road looking for another hiding place. I thought Philip would hide from this weather. I didn't know about Jack. He might still be running somewhere. I ducked in a lean-to shed filled with garden tools and a lawnmower. But then Philip might still be running after Jack too. Mama wouldn't take Cody out in the hail. Rain maybe, but not hail. I ran across a meadow until I got to a large tree. I joined more cows there. The tree was large enough to keep us all safe from hail. The cows looked at me, then went back to eating grass. I could see a hay barn across the paddock, a barn I'd never seen before. The door was open. As the hail came down faster and harder, I ran across the mud to the open door and went inside. It was a barn with only a few windows, and I could smell the sweet smell of the bales of hay stored there for the cows and horses. I walked in the path between the neat bales that were bound with twine. The farmer was neat, too. The old wood floors were smooth and clean as if the farmer had swept them. I walked on without calling out. The hail had grown heavier or bigger, I couldn't tell, but the noise filled the barn. And then when I passed the last neat bales in the very back of the barn, when I was about to give up, I found them, Philip and Jack. Philip was asleep in a loose pile of hay, Jack sleeping next to him, curled close to Philip. I didn't say anything. I sat down next to Jack. He raised his head and looked at me the way he had when he slept on my red poppy sheets, and then put his head back down in the hay and went back to sleep. I stroked his body and he didn't move. He was warm. My throat felt tight. I could feel tears at the edges of my eyes. Suddenly I felt so tired. The noise of hail and wind was steady, and Jack and Philip slept on. I pulled my rain jacket around me and lay back in the hay. I turned on my side so I could see them. I watched them for a long time, and then I slept. And that is the end of chapter 12 for today. I hope you join me for 13 and 14 tomorrow, and then we just have 15 and 16 left. Have a great day, guys.